Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Carla from Rehan Allahwala's World of Connections. That's such a mouthful to say. And today I'm really excited because I am speaking with Noor Gillani. I hope I'm saying it right. Rehan has told me that he's a really great guy, and I believe you also hosted Rehan in Alabama. And I'm excited to find out everything I can about Noor and talking to him. In any case, before we get into Noor talking, I want to tell you that this show, like all of my shows, is sponsored by the Institute of Peace, which is an online organization promoting peace one conversation at a time. Noor, can you please introduce you?
Sure, thank you. My name is Noor Gillani. I was born a Muslim of Indian ethnic origin, South Asian Indian ethnic origin, but I was born in East Africa. So my parents moved from India to Tanzania in East Africa. It was Tanganyika then, actually. Um, that's the wild game country of Africa, really. And so my early education was in Tanzania. I graduated from high school there, and then I moved to England to do my upper school, which is the entrance requirement for the university in Britain. But I really always wanted to go to Harvard since I was 10 years old. Um, because the head of the religious community I belonged to was at Harvard when I was 10 years old. And so I really badly wanted to go. So from England, I applied in 19, I was in England from 61 to 63. And that was a time of independence and a lot of changes in East Africa, which a lot of our properties were nationalized and a lot of things like that happened. So my parents were going through a very difficult time financially. So I could only go to Harvard if I got a scholarship also. So I did apply, and luckily I made it, got a scholarship also. And so in 63, I came to the US as an undergraduate at Harvard. I finished my undergraduate degree at Harvard, and then in applied physics, then went on to Washington University in St. Louis to do my doctorate. I did my doctorate in mechanical engineering and biomedical engineering, and graduated in 1974, right in the middle of the oil crisis. And that oil crisis had a major impact on my life because the field of biomedical engineering was a brand new field at that time. Only a couple of companies were doing any work in that, and a couple of universities had any programs in that, Washington University being one of them. So there were absolutely zero jobs available. The reason is that the oil companies were somehow furnishing the revenue for those biomedical engineering companies and the universities, and the oil money had dried up. So nobody was doing any hiring in that field. So I had to switch my field after my PhD. And that switch was to atmospheric science and air quality. So I spent the next 36 years in academia doing teaching and research in air quality science. So I finished my PhD at Washington University in St. Louis, and I joined the faculty there. And I was there until 1992, and then left to come to join NASA. And I was both with NASA and the university here. until my retirement about 10 years ago. So my first 10 years in research were focused on, these were really very early years in air quality science research. We didn't really know very much. We had to instrument airplanes and go out and fly and find out what was out there and what was causing it to move and change chemically and so on. And so that study was really limited to about 100 kilometers, 200 kilometers from the source of the air pollution. And most of the measurements were done from airplanes and ground vehicles. The next 10 years, I was more focused on regional scale, continental scale transport of air pollution when we used more sophisticated means. But after that, I needed to go to some place where there was global scale information, and that was at NASA. And so I came here mainly to expand my research into the global scale. Then I retired in 2010, about 10 years ago. And since then, I left my professional work completely and focused instead on working on a small private foundation that I had set up about 10 years before my retirement. And so I'm still working with that foundation. It was set up in 2001, before 9/11, actually. The focus of that foundation is to help children in distress anywhere in the world. I have always been very touched by suffering of children. Let me go back and tell you a little bit about a program I was working on from 1987 to 1997 when I was still teaching. I was appointed as a member of the Aga Khan Education Board. The Aga Khan is the head of the religious community I belong to, and he has the largest private development network in the world. I was assigned a task of developing a program for child development and parent empowerment. And I spent the next 10 years, my 10 years association with that organization, developing such a program of child development. And it turned out to be a very innovative and successful program. And as part of that, as it turned out, on guidance from the Aga Khan himself, he wanted, this was a new community of people coming from Asia and Africa to the US and other Western countries. And he was emphasizing how we were going to bring up our children here, both as meritocratic citizens and as good Muslims. And he advised me to try to do it in the context of Islamic humanism. And I had no idea what that meant, not at all. And actually, there wasn't much literature in it also. And I ended up doing the research to develop a model of Islamic humanism. And what I learned in that model was very, very powerful stuff. It included a divinely ordained purpose of human life. That's a jewel you don't come across very often. And I had just been divorced also not long before that. My life, I had moved from one location where I had spent about 25 years to another location. So my life was also in pieces, really, in a way. And this model provided me exactly the answer I was looking for. It told me what God had ordained to be our purpose in life here. And that model is also comes out of a covenant that exists between God and the human being. And it is, it is something we have promised to God to do. So, and I had no idea that I had promised all those things to God. And when I began to really understand what it was and began to implement it in my life was transformed. It was literally transformed. And I discovered especially two things that were most important. And these are not earth-shaking, but the whole model taken together was. It not only was a model of human, of the purpose of human life, but it also told me what it means when you say, I'm made in the image of God. That's a large words, but what does it exactly mean? And the answer came out in this model. And it also told me what was the religious significance of pluralism, which is a very important concept in Islam, but which I had not recognized before that. So what I learned in Islamic humanism, and so there were two things I was supposed to do for God as part of the purpose of my life. And one is Abd Allah, which means a servant of God, a worshiper of God, a devotee of God. Love God. So Christians and Jews believe that there are two very important purposes of life. And one is to love God, and the other is to love thy neighbor. And in Islam, it is Abd Allah, to be a devotee of God, to love God. And the other one is Khalifa. Khalifa really ultimately means an emissary of God on earth to look after his creation. So working to look after God's creation is part of my promise to God. That is what my life is about. So I have therefore devoted my life as a volunteer for the cause of children's development. And I did that for 10 years as that program I was working with in my religious community. And then after 2000, I set up my own private foundation for children in distress. And I've been doing that for the last 20 years or so.
What is the name of the program?
That program was called PIAR, spelled PIAR. This is the program for my religious community. PIAR was an acronym for Positive, Informed, Active, and Regular Parenting. So it was a program of child development and parent empowerment. So we wanted parents very much to be involved in the development of the children. And so PR was the name of the kind of parenting we were looking for. But then when I was done with that program and started my own foundation, it is also called PR, but spelled a little bit differently. It's spelled PYAR, and it's not an acronym, it's just the word PR, which means love. It means love in many Indian languages. So it is for me to cultivate love for children and do whatever I can to help them. And I have about 12 or 15 projects around the world doing work in that area. And so I travel a fair bit also, and especially to India. And I had been planning to go to Pakistan this year, but with COVID, it didn't work out. I have one project in Balochistan in Pakistan, other projects in India and Nepal and in Africa, and even a couple of projects in the US. So in retirement, I focused on working on my foundation, working on peace work. I was the vice president of the peace organization of educators around the world. So it was called International Association of Educators for World Peace. And I was also very much involved in interfaith work. And then for myself personally, I was very much focused on understanding what spirituality is and in practicing spirituality. And slowly, I'm getting out of all the other things except my foundation and my spiritual development. During the early years after 9/11, I was very much involved in speaking on Islamophobia and related subjects. With really a lot of misinformation about Islam, I felt an obligation to do something like that. But now I'm trying to withdraw. I've withdrawn from my peace work. I've withdrawn from my interfaith work. Well, interfaith work we cannot do for the past 2 years because of COVID. We cannot get together at all. But so I'm focused in my spiritual development and on the work of the foundation for children. So that's, I guess, a good introduction. I cannot hear you.
Thank you for reminding me. Do you have your Facebook page open? Can you close it, please?
Okay. That should be closed now?
Great. There was an echo, and it's an echo if you have another browser open that has, or another tab open that has a video at all. So you need to close it when you're on StreamYard. And I forgot to tell you, I realized it as we were talking. Now, let's get back to your foundation. The one that you are doing with spirituality, what did you name that one?
So my foundation is called PR, which is love for children. So it is a foundation which focuses on the cause of children. No specific work on spirituality as part of that.
Okay, you are getting back to it.
The spiritual part is just for me personally.
Okay, let's get back to the spirituality. Can you do me a favor and give me a definition, your definition of spirituality?
Well, in the Quran, there is a story of man. When God created the universe and all the different beings in it, he wanted somebody to look after his creation. So he went around and asked all the beings, and the only one who agreed to do it was the human being. And when that happened, then God breathed his spirit and his light into the human being, only into the human being. So the human being had a soul before, but that is not divine. When God breathed his spirit into the human being, he made him divine. And one of the purposes of our life is to return to God, to go back to our origin. In other words, and that is that to try to facilitate that development from humanity to divinity. That is um, the spiritual practice. So God had given the soul to not only the human being, but to everything on earth. Every molecule, every atom has a soul. You know, there are perhaps gradations, but every being has a soul. The human being has the most advanced soul, but it is a human quality. It is not a divine quality, and it is constantly changing. The spirit in us is a divine gift, and that divinity is perfect. It doesn't change. It doesn't have to change. It's totally perfect. But the soul is constantly changing. It goes from being our ego to being our totally contented self, constantly changing. But we have to begin to control it and make it develop to ultimately become, as we say, fana, become annihilated in the spirit, to really become part of the spirit, to merge into the spirit and cease to exist itself. So that is the process of development. We call it spiritual development, but it is really the development of the soul, not of the spirit. Spirit doesn't change. So spiritual development is really a misnomer. It should be soul development, if you wish.
Now, I have a question for you. Isn't the soul the basis of everything we are? And that
Yes, yes.
developed, but it's there.
It's there, and it is our innermost self. It is our innermost self. And it can be our animal self, our ego self, or it can be higher selves. And the purpose of our life is to cultivate it and develop it towards its highest self. And that highest self is one in which it is totally purified and enlightened and becomes part of divinity. So the soul has a life until it becomes lost in the spirit. That is the end of our life. It is not eternal until it becomes spiritual.
But isn't everything we do, if we do it wholeheartedly, spiritual, part of spirituality?
Well, our soul can also do horrible things. Our innermost self can want to be very egotistical, or want all kinds of things that may be at the expense of other people. So our soul can do wonderful things, but it can do horrible things also. It's the same soul. It's our self. Some people are very egotistical, and to satisfy their ego, they will wipe out many people. But then there are others who are not self-centered, who are focused on doing the two things that we have promised to God: to love Him and to love God and to love everybody else, to look after God's creation, not just a human being, but all beings in God's creation.
We breathe in and out every day. Our breath in is when our life begins. Our last breath is it going out. How can you separate spirituality, the soul, and who we are? I'm trying to understand.
The soul is who we are. Our soul is our innermost self. Okay?
Absolutely.
Our innermost self also has the Spirit of God and the light of God within us to guide it. But when we commit many sins, then we put a veil between the spirit and the soul. And that is what happens in most cases, is that we have really pushed away the spirit from guiding us, and we have become egotistical and are just working by ourselves, with our soul. And our soul, the soul is not necessarily a good thing. It can be a very good thing or a very bad thing. The Quran talks about 3 states of the soul. The lowest state is our animal self. And what is an animal? An animal always runs from pain and goes after pleasure, no matter what. And we become like that, you know. Many of us are focused on comforting ourselves, doing things that will be pleasurable to us, and running away from the pain. And if that becomes our life, then it is a meaningless life. Our purpose is to cultivate the higher potential of the soul.
But how can we be separate from the soul?
Sorry, I didn't get it.
How can we be separate from the soul?
No, we can't. No, we are not separate from the soul. But we do have control over it. And we are the soul, right? So our soul can be doing things that are ultimately very bad for it. But it is pleasurable. You know, it is pleasurable to go after money, and we think it is pleasurable, and we do all kinds of things, harm to a lot of other people to go after money. But rather, if we try and help children, or we try and do other things that will make us feel good about ourselves, you know. So there are higher things we can do to lift the soul and go to its highest potential. That is the purpose of our life. And we are our soul.
I agree with that. I think it's a matter of semantics right now.
But we have to develop it. We have to do the things that will make it develop itself to the highest state where it is pure and it is enlightened and ready to become one with the Spirit. That is the purpose.
See, that's where I'm having trouble putting together what you're saying, because I don't see much of a difference between the soul and the spirit. To me, they are already
the difference between them is that the spirit is divine. It is divinity. It is perfect. Therefore, it is not changing. It is perfect all the time. Our soul is moving up and down constantly. It can be very good or very bad. and it is not at all divine. It has to become divine. And to become, sorry?
That's where I disagree, because I feel like the soul and the spirit are one thing, and that we are not aware the soul is missing that value of the spirituality. But it may be just a matter of semantics here more than anything else.
No, it is not just a matter of semantics. The difference is that our spirit is perfection. Our soul is not divine, it is human. And as everything else that is human, it is constantly changing, and we can become very harmful to other people, or we can be very good to everything in the universe. And that is what we have to do, and we have to become conscious of the existence of the spirit in us. That consciousness, the awareness of the spirituality will help us to bring the soul and the spirit together. So, in Hinduism also, there is the Atma and the Maya, the world of the Atma and the world of the Maya. The world of the Maya is the world of the soul. The world of the Atma is the world of the spirit. And these are two different worlds. And ultimately, there is ultimately one reality, and that is the divine reality. But we have to take the soul to the level, to the kind of being where it is perfectly pure. We cannot go back to God in an impure state because He is pure. So we have to become pure, and we have to also become enlightened. And that is the process of raising the level of the soul to that divine level is what spiritual development is. And in Christianity also, there is soul and spirit are quite distinguishable, different things in the same way. In Hinduism also. So the world of the soul is the world of humanity. The world of the spirit is the world of divinity. And the world of the humanity is an illusion in a way. We have to escape that illusion and become part of the spirit. But we have to evolve it.
I'm working hard on this because I've seen it in my mind. I see it a little differently, but that's okay.
Well, if we were spiritual, if we were in contact with the spirit all the time, then we would be getting guidance. We should be getting guidance from the spirit and the light. But most of us have closed that door. We are the process of making decisions. It's what we call the work of the intellect. Okay, the process of making decisions is, first of all, you cultivate and use your intellect and make an intellectual decision. But our intellect is always partially developed. One of the things that the human being has is that his intellect can be cultivated without limit. A dog can only cultivate his intellect so far. He doesn't have the capacity to go beyond that. But our intellect can be cultivated forever. And when we make an intellectual decision, it is based on the decision of a partially developed intellect, and therefore it can be wrong. And therefore we have to turn to our conscience inside and ask the conscience if our decision is correct. And that is turning to the Spirit. And if we can connect with the Spirit and get the answer, then that is the correct answer to use. So these are the processes to develop ourselves spiritually. That covenant I was talking about between God and us, it involves these two things we have to do for God, to be His Abdullah and to be His Khalifa. But in return, God has given us 5 very special gifts which have no limit, which can be cultivated always. Intellect is one of them. Our free will is another one of them. Our ability to speak and communicate is another one. The Spirit of God in us and the divine guidance that comes from it is another one of them. So we have to cultivate all those things, use them towards these 2 things we are supposed to do. And there is a monkey wrench also. There is the ego. We have to control the ego also. So this is really the purpose of our life, to cultivate the gifts of God, to do the things we are supposed to do for Him, and to control the ego. So the Spirit is there to guide us if we can connect with it and get the guidance and use it. But if we it's like a lamp with the light of God in it, but we have put so much gunk on the glass of the lamp that it's become obscure. What is inside is obscure to us, and we cannot connect with it. So we have to keep it clean. And ultimately, we have to become totally clean to be able to connect with divinity and to become part of divinity. So the soul is us, and us can be good or bad. And we are both of them. Sometimes we are good, sometimes we are very bad. But that is not the Spirit. The Spirit would never do anything like that. The Spirit only loves us. The Spirit is God. But the soul is not. And this is spelled out in the Quran, and it is also spelled out in the Vedas. Sorry?
You need to turn something off. I am again echoing, and it's from your side.
Oh, really? I don't have anything else open.
It's strange. In any case, do you have any words of wisdom to end this conversation?
Yeah, my word of wisdom would be to do what we have contracted with God to do. We have a 2-way contract with God. God has given us certain very special gifts which make us in the image of God. If we cultivate them enough, our intellect can be developed without limit, but God can, with His grace, pick us up and enlighten us. And when we become enlightened, we become the Spirit of God. In the same way, all the 5 gifts that we have from God can be cultivated to their limit to do our job as Abdullah and Khalifa, to love God and to love His creation. That is what we have to do, and to keep the ego under control. So, to satisfy what we have promised to God as the purpose of our life, we should do that. We should understand what that purpose is, and we should do everything to satisfy, to meet our promise in that covenant. That is the best advice I can give. I have tried to do that in my life, and it has completely transformed me. That is the way we are going to spiritually develop also.
Did you try or did you do it?
I've been doing it for 20 years, 30 years.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You can understand why I asked that question. Trying isn't wholeheartedly, but doing is doing.
Yeah, the practice, it requires patient perseverance. You cannot control when you're going to reach the end. God only does that, but we have to keep practicing. We have to keep doing it. And we have to control our ego. That's not a simple thing. So there's a lot involved, but we can make it the practice that is directed only in the one direction of moving up.
Thank you so much for talking to me tonight.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Did you enjoy it?
I have a very brief 3-page article on Islamic humanism, which is talking about this covenant. I can share it with anybody who is interested. And I think if you begin to understand it and accept it and do it, and I'm quite sure that you can gain from it all that I have gained, and it is transformative.
Well, when we are finished, you can go into Facebook on either your page or my page, or even Rehan's, and put the link to that article in the public chat. And that way everyone would have it. Putting it on my page may make it more likely to go out to everyone.
Okay, I'll just send it to you in Messenger.
I would rather you put it in yourself, but if you need me to, I will.
No, I can put it in a messenger message to you.
Okay.
You know.
And with that, we have come to the very end of this interview. I want to thank Noor Gillani for speaking with me, and those who watched, and the Institute of Peace for sponsoring this interview. And we are going to wave goodbye, and I will be back with more interviews. Have a good day, people.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
You want me to stay? You want me to stay on?
Just